I think the way that we run from God's will is just by ignoring it. Like we just kind of like, well, maybe if I don't do anything with this, he'll forget. And we go home, we wake up the next morning, the roof hasn't fallen in, the kids aren't sick, there's not an unexpected bill in the mail, my tires aren't flat, my day goes pretty good at work. Okay, well, maybe God's not mad at me.
Yeah.
Maybe he did forget. Maybe it wasn't a big deal. Maybe it was just optional.
Right.
And we use those circumstances, or specifically lack of, quote, bad things in our life to say, well, God must not be ticked off, so I'm good.
Welcome to Let's Talk About That, the podcast where we take a deeper dive into Sunday's message and explore any questions you might have. I'm your host, AJ Stevens, joined by lead pastor Chip Parker, and I'm thrilled to be on this journey with you. Whether you're a longtime member of the Orchard or a first-time visitor, Let's Talk About That is your space to explore, reflect, and connect. Join us as we navigate the intricacies of faith, spirituality, and daily life, seeking to understand how the wisdom shared on Sundays can be applied to our modern challenges. So, grab a cup of coffee, find a comfortable space, and let's dive in together. This is Let's Talk About That, where the conversation about Sunday's message never stops.
Well, Chip, we're back. That is how I feel in my soul at this moment.
Have you recovered yet?
You know, this is the first time that we have done like a church, student, kids, whatever event. I've been in ministry for, at this point, over 20 years, right? Either full-time, part-time ministry, 20 years. This is the first time I felt old after.
Yeah.
First time I felt old after.
I don't know what that says about me because I felt pretty old after too. And I was exhausted when I got home.
And it was only 30-something hours.
Yeah. 30 hours it's 30 hours straight is a lot, especially when you're like responsible for other humans and trying to make sure you're not just responsible for them, but have a plan together for them. And then they're keeping you awake at 2 a.m. in the cabin with a quick turnaround the next morning.
That was on you, big dog.
Yeah. I told him, I was like, hey guys.
I heard security had to come to your cabin and tell you to be quiet.
That's a lie. First of all, that's a lie.
Are you sure?
Yes. I told
you weren't bouncing a basketball against the wall?
No, but he was bouncing a basketball. That would have woke me up. And there was no bouncing a basketball.
I didn't say it was after curfew. I just said they had to come to your room and tell you to be quiet.
If it was the case, it was while I was not in the room. So I can't speak to it.
Because I thought it was you they told had to be quiet.
Bouncing the basketball?
I don't know. This is the story I'm hearing.
You heard a fairy tale because I was exhausted by the time I got in there, and I told them. And they kept it cordial. Shout out to the high school guys from Live Oak. I asked them, I said, hey, you guys, lights are out at 11, but you guys can, talk as long as you guys keep it low-key. And they did a good job of keeping it low-key. And by about 12:30, I said, all right, boys, we're going to go from low-key to go to sleep.
Okay.
That was when we went to sleep.
So two things. Number one is that's the wrong answer because you can't ever give kids permission to break the rules. Yeah. Number two is we've gone about a minute and a half without explaining for 1 second what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's true. So this weekend, we just got done with an awesome student ministry event. If you are familiar with church world at all, you'd probably grew up calling these D-Now weekends or something of that nature, discipleship now, but
lock-ins.
Oh, it's a cuss word. Lock-in is a cuss word.
What was this if not an off-site lock-in?
Yeah, which is cool if you go off-site. But this is the difference between this and a lock-in. Lock-ins don't have curfews. Lock-ins, as I understood
them. You have never been to a Chip Parker lock-in.
Yeah, no, the lock-ins I went to as a student were like, hey, do whatever you want till the break of dawn as long as you don't leave this building. And we had games and food and all that kind of thing. And then
it's not a D-Now. It's not a lock-in because, baby, it's bold.
It's bold. So we called it Bold Weekend. And shout out to Lucas here. We helped Lucas, who set up 90% of this thing. And, man, he just did a great job of making sure that there was a plan for students from the minute they got there to the minute they went home. And we assisted him in that plan, but really and truly, that guy, he did a great job.
Yeah, I want to take a minute to just shout Lucas Lightout. He's been a guest here on the podcast, and he is our worship leader, student leader over in Live Oak, and he did a great job putting this together, not just for all of our locations, but for 3 churches in Perry that joined us, over 100 people there when you count kids, volunteers, everybody. It was a great time for students, and there's a lot that went on to make that happen, and you might not know that unless you were the guy making it happen. And Lucas did a phenomenal job with that. I think Bold is one of the best events that we do at the Orchard. I think the quality of Bold is just really, honestly, top tier. It could probably stand to be a little more maybe organized, spot on, punctual. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah. But if it's looking to be more punctual, they need more people besides me, you, Lucas, and Matt doing the punctuality.
Matt taking a solid 40 minutes during the game time in the last evening.
We had 20 minutes for games. Matt 45 minutes later. All right, we got one more game.
I know.
But it was a good time. So circling back, the answer for when kids in your dorm are trying to get you to stay up late.
Yeah.
You just can't give them permission to break the rules. You can't do that. What you say is, well, I'm going to sleep. And as long as you guys don't wake me up, I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you're not explicitly giving them permission, and you're making them be quiet, because if you're keeping me up, you're going to sleep. But if you're letting me go to bed, that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah. I think I would be more terrified of going to sleep first in a cabin like that, if I'm being honest.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough.
Man. But, those guys, they get to get away. They made a commitment to be somewhere for a weekend. I figure, let's let them have some fun. They're doing it in a wholesome way. Let's just let them lean in a little bit. And to their credit, this probably isn't the case for every student, because I saw some students on the sleep cam that Chris had going, the Deucer. They stayed awake, and they were punctual, and they did a good job throughout the day. So
good stuff. Good stuff. And I will say, it was Lucas leading the charge. Our pastor's staff, we helped him round it out. But, man, we had an army of volunteers that were there, keeping those kids fed, leading small groups, running security, maybe that same security instigating inter-cabin pranks, 100%. Not talking about anybody but Cody Blackburn, just to make sure that we're clear. And we had so many volunteers that gave up their weekend to be there. It was awesome.
Yeah, if you missed it and you're listening to this and you're like, dang, I didn't know the Orchard did something like that, or I didn't know there was something like that. It's for 6th through 12th graders, and we do it. We have done it the past 2 years, and as far as we understand, there's plans to do it again next year, but just a great way for them to get away, to sit with God's Word. Sometimes a change of place and a change of pace leads to a change of perspective, and so it's just good to get them away from everything. So if you have a 6th through 12th grader, you missed it, and you don't want them to miss it next year, be on the lookout for that, because it's a good time, and there will be value in it for them and you as a parent when you get a kid back who hopefully has had their life changed by Jesus. So.
Well, speaking of, the first year bold kids met Jesus. This year bold kids met Jesus. And then kids who knew Jesus, were still impacted. And I think that's one of the things that is really important to me, is that we don't want to have a student ministry that's built on events, right? Because, if you grew up like I did in the 90s, student ministry culture, is all event-based, fun, silly games. Come check out how crazy we are, pizza, And I'm not saying there's not a place for that. What I'm saying is, I guess what I should say is that the churches who want to beat down churches that wear jeans and have lights and drums for being attractional are the same student ministries that are bribing kids with pizza and fun games and let's have a great time. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with doing things that kids can have fun at when they come. And we did that at Bold, to be clear, not taking a shot at that. We did that at Bold. But my favorite thing is seeing kids get serious about worship and get serious about talking through what the implications of being a Christian are for their life, and just giving them a time to focus on that. I told the church in Live Oak yesterday, I preached at our Live Oak location, and I said, I wish that we had as many people in our churches, specifically older generations, that would, to their face, encourage and uplift the next generation as they do complain about them behind their back. And I think that's a word not just for the Orchard, because honestly, there's not a lot of that goes on at the Orchard. But I think that's a word for churches and Christians everywhere. Hey, instead of complaining about the next generation, how lazy they are, entitled they are, back in my day, how about you encourage them, because man, they are the ones who are going to take the church into the future. And if you're saying, well, I'm just not sure what the future of the church is. Well, I am. The future of the church is the gates of hell aren't going to prevail against it. And it's going to be led by these guys and girls. And I'm excited about that.
I love that. And I love that because the last night I'm walking back to my cabin to make sure the trash is gone. The key goes in the door. And there's one of our small group leaders, Stephanie Littleton, standing there with one of her girls. And I walk by and Stephanie goes, I just want you to know she just gave her life to Jesus. And then as I start to talk more to Stephanie and Lucas, I realized this isn't just a one-off. This randomly happened. This was Stephanie over and over and over and over again.
Time over time, investment and investment.
Yeah, just leaning into her, pouring into her, looking at her and saying, hey, there's value in you, not just a disgruntled adult talking to a kid who they don't think has their stuff together. But I think that's where you see it come to life, right? I'm encouraging the student over and over and over again. Boom, steps into a relationship with Jesus. now they trust me, and now we're going to cultivate the rest of this through discipleship and everything else. Just
it really was pretty special to see that in particular, knowing how much Stephanie has poured into that particular relationship. But really, even for the students who didn't have quote unquote life-changing moments at Bold, it was good just to see the kids connect with each other, connect in a serious way to their faith. It was refreshing. Now, it was tiring, but it was refreshing. And man, what a great venue at Camp Anderson Anchored. Shout out to camp director John Egan.
Yeah,
fantastic host. It's such a great place. If you're looking for a place to do an event, Camp Anderson Anchored it's a great place.
He's the man. Yeah, it was awesome. That was one of my favorite moments, though, was Stephanie hearing that. But I have a few favorite moments. Do you have any favorite moments from Bold this week?
I got a couple of favorite moments, I think, from Bold. You know, the one favorite moment that I had very early on was absolutely smoking a kid in chess. It was phenomenal. He was telling me how good he was, how he played in tournaments in high school. And when I say chess, I mean like chess pieces that are about half my height.
Yeah,
so half my height's
chessboard.
about, a foot and a half. And we played chess, smoked the kid, and he's just sitting there dumbfounded. And I'm like, yeah, not all adults are idiots.
Yeah.
So that was one. Second favorite moment might be, I don't know if favorite's the right word. I will say burned in my brain moments are watching you and your wife and other leaders eat stuff that has been recently dug out of chocolate pudding with the toes of teenagers. And look, I get the whole Matt threw you on the spot. Hey, if you guys will eat that, they all get a prize. And I'm telling the kid, if I'm up there, look, we will load up and go to Dollar General after that, and I will buy you all the candy you want. But homie, I'm not eating that.
Yeah, here's the difference between me and you, Chip.
That you give in to peer pressure?
I got that dog in me, son. And I loved Katie just having that dog in her,
Your wife
too.
is the one who's
It was awesome.
Katie just sent it. So that was another a fun moment for me to see that. And I think maybe a moment that, might not seem like that big a deal, but it was one I thought just was a really special moment is I took a picture on Saturday night, shared it on social media. And in that picture, you see kids worshiping, and that is one of my favorite parts. But specifically, we have a friend who is a student leader at one of the churches in Perry named Justin. And Justin had his, slightly above toddler age daughter. He and his wife had her there with him this weekend at Bold. And man, during that worship service, she was just perched up on his shoulders. And, who knows what she remembers about this when she is those students' age. But that this weekend probably is going to be something that she remembers. Mom and dad, high school, middle school students, and seeing that little girl there on his shoulders, in worship. I don't know. That was a favorite. That was a favorite moment for me.
That's so cool, man. That's the generational impact parents you guys can get to have in those moments. But I have a favorite moment too, Chip. And I'm not just going to let you get away with putting me on the spot because you got up there and it was in the video. Some of y'all saw in the video and I think you were probably like, man, who is that guy? I don't know that guy on staff, but hiding under those pit vipers in that hoodie with those tall white socks was our lead pastor, Chip Parker. And you got up there, dripped out, boy, and let these kids know that you kind of knew some of what they were talking about when they say different things in Gen Z language.
Number one, I just think that all of you who are listening to this need to know the utter jealousy that poured out of AJ, Lucas, Matt, Eddie, all of them, because of my ability to connect with Gen Z in that moment. Like, it was just, we were locked in step. I knew the lingo, I knew the words, I knew how to put that language in use in a way that just builds that bridge.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Cap.
Oh no. So
I'm not sure that's true. But
so speaking of cap, AJ, I have a list here in front of me that I think will be helpful for us to play a little game together. And that game is all about Gen Z language. Okay. Because I hate to admit this, but I've promised everywhere I go, that I'm going to be as transparent as possible. So in full transparency, I was hard on Google before I got up to use Gen Z language to make sure that I knew what these words meant. Yeah. And so I'm curious if you know what Gen Z words mean. So you said cap. Yeah. That's a gimme. Everybody knows what cap means. Sure. Cap is not a hat. No, that's not what cap is, right? Cap is what? That's a lie. That's not true.
Lie.
It is the opposite of facts.
Yeah.
not facts, like FACTS, but fax, FAX.
Fax
right?
machine.
Yeah, so no
Which
printer.
is so ironic.
No
because
printer.
these kids have no idea what a fax machine is.
All right, so getting to the game. Here's what I got for you.
Here we go.
I got 4 words that are used by Gen Z.
Okay.
And I'm interested if you know what they mean. But to add a wrinkle in this,
Yeah.
I also have 4 words that are totally made up but sound like they may be used by Gen Z. And so I'm going to throw these words out there, and I'm going to let you decide if this is a real Gen Z word or if this is a fake Gen Z word. And if it's real, what does it mean?
Okay.
You are able to ask me to use the word in a sentence.
Okay.
If you need it used in a sentence.
All right.
All right. We ready?
Scale of 1 to 10. What's the difficulty here? Be honest with me.
To be honest, I don't know that I'm relevant enough with Gen Z to know if these are going to be difficult or not.
Fire it off.
You know, if Eddie was here, 10. You know,
Eddie caught a stray. Eddie caught a stray.
And here was Eddie filling in for you last week. How dare you let me do that?
That's crazy.
All right. So here we go. The word is pebbles. Pebbles.
I'm gonna go with use it in a sentence.
That history exam was pebbles.
I'm gonna go with not a real Gen Z word on that one.
You are correct.
All
it is
right.
not a Gen Z word. It is not a Gen Z word. However, you know, pebbles, like it's not a rock. It's not big. It was like little. It was easy. Anyway, that was.
So you're saying you're trying to make it a Gen Z word.
Oh boy, I got definitions for all my fake Gen Z words, just so you know. All right. Second word is feta.
Feta. Please use it in a sentence.
Their relationship. Give me 2 Gen Z students' names. Brennan and Michaela. Their relationship was feta.
It's tricky. I'm gonna say.
You know what feta cheese is?
Yes.
What is feta cheese? What kind of cheese is it?
I don't know.
It's a hard cheese. It crumbles.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's feta.
I'll go with sure. That's a Gen Z word.
That is not a Gen Z word.
Oh, you set me up. You made it so
word. But that is a
unattainable.
well thought out definition, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Next
Should have stuck with my gut there.
word, finna.
Finna, like I'm finna. Okay, use it in a sentence because I'm loving this sentence.
I'm fitting to guess you're gonna get this one right.
Finna. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Finna. Like I'm finna go slide with the homies.
Yeah. Well, I'm about to.
Yeah.
That is a Gen Z word.
Yeah.
All right. Delulu.
Delulu. I feel like I've got. I don't even know how to say this without
AJ was
insulting
Delulu eating that stuff out of pudding.
Yeah. I'm going to go with no. Delulu is not a word, but I feel like there's a part of me that thinks it could be a word because that's how far away from the English language we've gotten with Gen Z.
Delulu is actually Gen Z slang,
Okay.
and it is short for delusional.
Delulu. That's Delulu. Okay.
Delusional.
All right.
All right.
Golly.
All right. Here we go.
This is like an 8, by the way, on my scale that I asked you about.
Clipped.
Like I clipped a car going 90?
No, like, bro, I saw AJ playing volleyball. He was clipped.
No. Cap. Not a word.
Not a word. You're correct. It is not a word. The definition of that word would be really good because you clip highlights out of while you make reels on social
He
media.
said my fake definition, my fake word is really good. Here's why.
All right. Here we go. Couple more. Chuggy.
Chuggy's legit.
You've heard of Chuggy?
I've heard Chuggy, yeah.
I'd never heard of Chuggy in my life.
Yeah,
I
use
literally,
it
before
in
the
a sentence.
podcast, had to Google how to say Chuggy.
Yeah,
And apparently, Chip on stage was Chuggy.
Chuggy, yeah. I'm not sure the definition. Maybe cringe.
Cringe.
Yeah.
It's a synonym for cringe.
Which is crazy because now we're using Gen Z words to define Gen Z words. Because cringy,
Fair
right?
enough.
We use cringy, but anyway.
All right, fair enough. All right, there are 2 more words left.
All right.
And I'm going to give them both to you at the same time. One is real, one is fake.
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
Word 1, Finsta.
Yeah.
Word 2, parked.
Well, I know Finsta's a thing because it's a fake Instagram account. And parents, shameless plug, just because you have access to one of your kids' Instagram accounts doesn't mean you have access to their Finsta, which is where they put the stuff that they're actually doing, thinking, listening to, wearing, all that kind of stuff. So be on the lookout for Finstas, parents. That's a real thing, which means if one of them's real, the other one's not. Parked is not a real word, and I don't know. I would love
is not a real word.
But let me hear your definition for parked.
Parked is a word for boring.
Okay.
Right? Because if it's parked, it's not doing anything. It's just there, right? So parked is boring.
Oh, I think it's I think that's hilarious, Chip, that you came up with your own definitions.
Now watch this.
And you've justified them.
These are going to start taking off in student ministry.
Yeah.
Because AJ is 100% going to use either feta, pebbles, parked, or clipped in student ministry this week.
Bro, you're so parked right now. Get up. Let's worship.
That's right. There it is. There it is. Boom. Also, I had no idea. If you'd have had me, I think I would have got fena, right? And mainly because of AJ. I would have got Delulu because of the algorithm on TikTok. There's a guy he's the Delulu guy.
See, I'm not on TikTok. That's probably part of my
Chugi
problem.
and Finsta. Well, I mean, TikTok is just Instagram, but a month before it makes it to Instagram.
Right.
And then a year before it makes it to Facebook.
Yeah.
Chugi and Finsta, I no idea.
Chugi. Yeah. Heard
idea.
Chugi.
No idea.
Well, that's good. So I feel like I got, an 80 on that? Well, what's out of 8? 6 out of 8?
Well, let's see.
Out of 8.
You got Finna, you missed Delulu, you got Chugi, you got Finsta. You got pebbles, you got parked, you missed feta, and you got clipped.
6 out of 8.
Yeah,
whatever that
well,
percentage is.
no, that's 5 out of 8, right?
No, I only missed 2.
You did. All right, you're right.
Yeah.
6 out of 8.
Come on, man.
80, 70.
They praying for my downfall, dog. You know what I'm saying? All right, so that's good. We had a lot of fun.
That means you're about to turn 30. Hey,
yeah, no kidding. We had a ton of fun though, and it's cool because this is a joke, but also parents, the whole Finsta thing is a great reminder of why you really should try to stay somewhat in the loop with what your kids are doing and not just send them off to church or school and hope somebody else fixes them, but get involved in your kid's life, because as the slang changes, as the lingo changes, as the social media accounts change, as they get on Snapchat and you don't get to see what they say because it gets deleted, there's a lot of stuff that's probably going on right under your nose that you don't know about. So,
get in the loop. I'm not going to say pro parenting tip. I'm going to say stumbled into and has worked out great parenting tip. If you have family sharing on your iPhones, there are ways to make whatever they download on their phone come on your phone as well. And there are ways then, because you have their family passwords, to log into those apps that they have downloaded and not know about. And, I have my teenager is a good teenager. He does not get in trouble often except for having a teenagery attitude. Yeah. But he did find his way into an app and an online conversation that he didn't need to be a part of. And AJ was with me, and it was because it was cloned on my phone that I found it. Yeah. And you should have seen the chaos that ensued when everybody found out, wait, Chip's dad has been on here the whole time.
That is chuggy. Chuggy, if you're one of them. But it's good. I mean, be in the loop. That's good. So pivoting kind of out of bold a little bit in parenting pro tips, we just started a brand new series.
Talking about rebels.
Yeah, talking about rebels. No kidding. There's your plug.
That transition was clipped.
Clipped. It's going to die. It's never going to live. But we just started a brand new series, Jonah. And I think it's cool because you're getting a fresh perspective maybe on a book that you grew up knowing, and that was kind of where we went week 1, right? Was, hey, a lot of you are probably familiar with the concept, the idea, maybe some of the nuances in the story as far as like the characters and subplots go. And in fact, in Lake City this week, I started out the sermon by saying, hey, real quick, tell me what you know about Jonah, and just kind of let the audience, give me some feedback there. And it was interesting because it was all the cliche stuff, well, there's a whale, there's a fish.
It was all out of chapter 1.
Yeah, right. And so I'm excited about the series because we were in chapter 1 today and even gave maybe a little bit of a fresh perspective on that. But over the course of the next couple of weeks, I think the perspective will remain fresh, and we're going to get to see this theme kind of unfold.
I did see
throughout.
That familiar, unfamiliar dynamic in Live Oak when I was preaching in Live Oak too. Because I mentioned, I feel like you probably did too, because, AJ, you're leading our content, put together for this, where you're kind of pulling together all the resources that we use in our preaching meetings, kind of pointing us in a direction. And one of the things in your notes was that this isn't the only time in Scripture that we see Jonah. In fact, he's mentioned one other place and one other verse in Scripture, and that is in 2 Kings chapter 14, right? And it was so funny because after church, I had a husband and wife come up to me, and she was said, so Jonah is mentioned. I never knew that before. Could you give me that reference? And so I gave her the reference, and the husband is back there with just a very pleased smile on his face. And I'm looking at him. He's like, yeah, I knew.
I knew.
So it was that dynamic of, hey, this is an obscure fact about Jonah, but there's of you who knew.
Yeah.
You're the guys who roasted everybody in Awanas.
Yeah. Bible trivia master. as we started the sermon, though, I mean, I saw on your slides you had the little comic book picture, whatever, kids book picture. Sorry, not comic book.
Yeah,
kids
not
book
comic
picture.
book, more like cardboard book.
Yeah,
from kids.
And what I thought was so interesting about that is even the little description of Jonah getting spit out by the fish onto the shore was, and then
Jonah decided not to punish him anymore.
Yeah, Jonah changed his ways, and God was no longer angry with Jonah. And I think part of the stigma that we're bringing into this is like it just seems like a book about how God's mad when people don't do what he says, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that, what I'm pretty sure we all said in our message was, at least generally, when we think about Jonah, when we see we see God sending Jonah to preach against Nineveh, when you see God hurling a storm, and we're going to talk about that this week, right, this coming week. And, what's interesting, there's the word like that's used about God threw a storm is literally like if you were to throw a baseball, that's the same word. Like God threw a storm at Jonah. He got hit with a hurricane high and tight,
Yeah.
He sent a whale to swallow Jonah whole. He spits him out on the dry land. At the very end of the book, which, by the way, most people don't even make it to the end of the book, right?
Yeah.
Jonah sitting out in the scorching Middle Eastern sun, and yet God sends the sun to specifically wither the plant, giving him shade and give sunburn on his already fuming head.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't seem like a very happy New Testament-y God, and yet it is, because God is probably the character that we misunderstand most inside the book of Jonah. Like we know the big facts, the whale, the storm, the prophet, but we miss the point.
Yeah. Yeah, and so hopefully throughout the series, we're going to recover some of that, and we're going to see who God truly is in the story, because as we start to understand the purpose behind the storm, the purpose behind the fish, the purpose behind all of this, it's to say, hey, it's better for you to be where I want you to be than where you think it's best for you, right?
Hey, no, don't start preaching next week's message.
Yeah. But it's good. I love it. We actually opened up in Lake City with a VeggieTales clip, because, sometimes, here's what I love about the Bible.
Oh, boy.
There's not always... for some people, it's hard for them to kind of visualize, and for some people, it's hard for them to kind of not just think, oh, it's a story that happened over there a long time ago, and they don't really see, they can't get the scene, their head wrapped around the scene or any of that and what's actually going on. And so I thought, what better way to help people get their heads wrapped around the scene
than to let animated vegetables
than
bring
with
it to
a piece
life.
of broccoli, dude. You know what I mean? So,
which... couple of things. Number one, when you said, I don't know if everything in Scripture, and you were saying is easy to visualize.
Right.
I thought you were going to say covered in VeggieTales, and I was going to say, I don't know, you might be wrong on that one.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Number two, issue with VeggieTales, right? And I don't know, maybe this has been brought up more, and I just don't realize it, but like when you think of VeggieTales, there are 2 stars to VeggieTales. It is Larry the cucumber and Bob the
tomato,
which is a fruit.
Yeah,
it's a fruit.
Veggie and fruit tails should be the
Bob the tomato is a fruit.
Yeah,
which is maybe why he's the most sensible.
So let me ask you this: why is Bob a fruit?
Because the seeds are inside a tomato.
Yeah. So what do you do with a cucumber?
Huh? Pickle it.
No, not to make it taste good. I'm saying.
Sorry. I didn't know.
Aren't the seeds inside of a cucumber?
I don't know. I'm shooting from the hip here,
I'm
right?
pretty sure they are, which makes it also a fruit. So I think.
Man, I'm maybe so domed up right now.
Maybe they just have the wrong name altogether.
All right, you're going to have to take the steering wheel for a minute, because I'm fixing to Google is a cucumber a fruit. But the other thing that I have to confess is that I have never actually watched VeggieTales, Jonah.
Well, me neither. So here was the interesting thing is...
Holy cow. Google, is a cucumber a fruit? Because cucumbers have seeds in the middle and grow from the flower of a cucumber plant. They are botanically a fruit.
We've been lied to.
Mind blown.
Oh, man. So
this is why we should never record a podcast after Bold.
That's crazy.
We need to do it live from Bold, not after Bold. This is off the rails so far. Hey, thanks for joining us live. Let's talk about that.
Live from Bold. I don't hate that. But with the whole, that just got completely derailed. I'm not going to lie to you. But that's fascinating. But with that whole thing, with the VeggieTales, with all that, I realized there's an age gap even there, because I had never seen Jonah either, because it came out in 2002, and so I had already kind of phased out of VeggieTales by the time that Jonah came around, even though I am a somewhat younger guy still. So I actually had to go watch a bunch of different clips to find what I was looking for in there, because I'd never seen it and I didn't know if what I was looking for existed. But all that to say, VeggieTales is how we springboarded into our conversation with Jonah, and I think it's good because the theme, again, that we're going to see over and over and over again is, God does all these things, but it's because God pursues rebels. And so I think even in that conversation, we've got to start to see ourselves the right way in the story. And so I know Sunday...
Well, I mean, so God pursues rebels.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that sounds like you can still hear that and think, so that he can give them what's coming to them.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But really that's not even the point. And that's why the subtitle of this series is not just Jonah, it's Jonah, Unexpected Grace.
Yeah.
And that's why we have to start seeing ourselves in here, not so that we can convince you that God's mad at you, you rebel, but that, hey, even though you are a rebel, right, there's unexpected grace there.
So I think if I'm listening, I'm your average listener here, and I'm like, man, okay, God pursues rebels, and I can definitely think of a time in my Christian life where I knew I was supposed to go talk to somebody, or I knew God was telling me, hey, you got to go over there or whatever. And this is obviously a plug back to our last Friday podcast where we talk about the clarity that God brings. But I think for a lot of us, we know, hey, God wants you to do something specific, and you know that thing that he wants you to do is a little bit difficult, right? The good news is God still chases after you. The question I have for you, Chip, I guess would be this: does God always chase after us? When we don't do what we're supposed to do, and we know as a believer, let me caveat this, as a believer.
Okay, as a believer.
Yeah.
I think then if you're going to caveat it and say as a believer, yes, I believe that God is always after us, if for no other reason than that God is in us, right? The Holy Spirit lives within us. So there's nowhere that I can flee from your presence, David says, you know, and if I go down to the grave, if I go down to the grave, you were there. And so I think that, yes, as a believer, God's always going to pursue you. Now, what that pursuit looks like could be drastically different, right? Like,
okay, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, it could be conviction that God is bringing into your life. It could be consequences for sin that God is allowing into your life, or it just could be that still small voice, you know? But I do think, that God is always after you. I think that if you look in the scriptures, I think that there is precedent to believe that when God chases us enough, what we can do is harden our heart so that it is desensitized to the pursuit of God in our life. And when we desensitize our hearts to the pursuit of God in our life, then we may stop feeling that or hearing that or seeing that pursuit. Doesn't mean he stopped pursuing. It just means that we have desensitized ourselves so much to it that we're numb. We don't feel it anymore.
Yeah.
What I would say is for unbelievers, I do believe that God will pursue an unbeliever, but I also believe that there can come a point in the life of an unbeliever where God just turns them over to their sin. And the reason I believe that is because I think Paul says that pretty specifically in Romans chapter 1.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Gives them over to their desires, which is fascinating. And so I think you see, especially in the first chapter here, both audiences, right? You see the believer, we'll just say put Jonah's in the believer category here. He's a prophet of God. And then you see another character pop up in the story. And this is kind of how we landed the plane, Nineveh.
All right, well, time out, because just, interesting teaser. Our next sermon series after Easter is going to be the story of the prodigal son.
Yeah.
And we're going to be talking about forgiveness, right? And so, not me. This is not unique with me. It doesn't come from me. There are a lot of smart people, a lot of really godly men and women who have made the connection between Jonah and the story of the prodigal son. And at the end of the prodigal son, we're not giving everything away right here, but at the end of the story of the prodigal son, it's the older brother, the presumed Christian, who is left out of the party, which is emblematic of heaven.
Yeah.
Right? And at the end of the book of Jonah, not giving everything away, but if you've read it, you know it. At the end of the book of Jonah, just like the older brother left with an open-ended, is he going to go in or is he going to stay out? Jonah is left outside of the revival that is taking place in the city. So maybe we assume Jonah's Christian, but at least God, through the inspiration and the author of Scripture, left both of those open-ended, so maybe?
Yeah, well, let's go a layer deeper with our analogy because the prodigal son was in my head as well, but you have, for both of these guys, in the middle of their fleeing or the middle of, for the older brother, the hardness of heart, whatever, him not figuring it out, you have circumstances in their lives that maybe seem for them to indicate, okay, I got off the hook, or okay, this worked out for me. And so maybe spend a minute and unpack why sometimes circumstances can't be trusted, because for Jonah, the boat's there. For the older brother, I'm still with dad here, right?
Oh yeah, that is so good. That is probably my favorite part from the message this first week, because the way I think that we run from God's call in our lives, which I hadn't told you this, because I have my Bible that I keep in my backpack, hard copy, that I use when I preach and, when I just have some time to read. But usually when I study for a sermon, I don't use my hard copy. I have software that I use that I can pull commentaries and notes from. And so really it wasn't until Sunday morning that I opened my Bible up to Jonah chapter 1 that I preach out of. That I'd just been pulling the text and everything. But when I opened my hard copy of my Bible that I used to preach from Jonah chapter 1, at the top of the page, I had written, "We think we're running from God's will. We're really running from God's presence." And if you look right there in chapter 3, it says twice he was running from God's presence, right? And so when we run from God's will, we're really running from God's presence. But the way that we run from God's will and God's presence, it is usually not to like physically run away. Like we don't hop a plane and buy a plane ticket to China and say, "Let me get out of here." I think the way that most of us, especially those of us who would be good Christian people, let's just say, I think the way that we run from God's will is just by ignoring it. Like we just kind of like, well, maybe if I don't do anything with this, he'll forget. And we go home and we wake up the next morning. The roof hasn't fallen in. The kids aren't sick. There's not an unexpected bill in the mail. My tires aren't flat. My day goes pretty good at work. Okay, well, maybe God's not mad at me.
Yeah.
Maybe he did forget. Maybe it wasn't a big deal. Maybe it was just optional.
Right.
And we use those circumstances, or specifically lack of, quote, bad things in our life, to say, well, God must not be ticked off, so I'm good.
Yeah.
And what we're going to see next week in a spectacular fashion is that, no, God doesn't forget.
Yeah.
And the circumstances that you're looking at, they're not a great indication of whether God cares or not, because what is funny, and I don't want to give away next week, but I can't help but say this, since we're talking specifically about it, the judgment of God, in my opinion, this is Chip's opinion. We hadn't hashed this out. We're going to do this tomorrow in the communication meeting. In Chip's opinion, the judgment of God was when he allowed Jonah to get in the boat and go to sleep. The grace of God was when he sent the storm to wake him up.
Yeah.
I think if you're looking for the judgment of God in your life, quote unquote, because you're disobedient, it's not going to come from those bad things that happen in your life, because those are the things that he's using to get your attention, to say, hey, wait, you're being disobedient.
Yeah.
The judgment comes when he's like, okay, if you want to be disobedient, have at it.
Yeah. It reminds me.
Anyway, we're going to flesh that out more this week. But
yeah, it reminds me of one of the conversations we have quite often, I guess, as we plan through these sermons, and it's sometimes your indifference to sin is one of the scariest places in the world to be, because it means you and God are not on the same page. And sometimes when that storm comes, it's one of the most gracious things you can experience, because it's God's way of saying, hey man, wake up. I need to get you out of indifference with sin. I want you to get right back where I know you're safest and where you're best, and that's right here with me. And it's not because you're safest and best, it's because I'm safest and I'm best. And so I think it's fascinating, and we did talk about it. I mean, we unpacked some of that, like what's coming next, as we start to unpack the circumstances conversation this week. And so we wouldn't totally spoil it, but one of the things I find,
that's the hard thing. It's hard to spoil Jonah,
right? It's all right there, really quick.
You get where we're going with this series as a whole, with the title "Unexpected Grace,"
right?
And the hey, you're Nineveh. Right? Like you start to see, hey, we're going to look at this series a little bit different, but once you see it different, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
So it's not spoiler. I mean, once you see it this week, you're going to see that theme throughout the rest of the book.
Well, that's in the storm itself. This will be a good place to pop in our nerd out section.
Nerd out.
Because here is what happens in the storm. It's almost like a little subplot for a different group of unbelievers. And I've always thought this part of Jonah was fascinating. But he gets in the boat, and the boat's fleeing, and he's indifferent or whatever. He's asleep. And this storm happens, and they're like, hey, everyone cry out to your God. And the reason I think this is a great nerd out section is because the reason they immediately say cry out to your God is because all these pagan Phoenicians understand there's one thing that we can't control, and it's the water. The water has some kind of mystical, deity-only controlled presence to it.
Yeah, so this is a great segment to nerd out on. But also, before we nerd out, let's just say that the practical implication of this: there's no atheist in a foxhole.
Absolutely,
right? Like when your back's against the wall, you got nowhere else to turn. You're throwing a prayer. One of the shows that Leanne and I have been watching together at night is Young Sheldon. We actually never finished The Big Bang Theory, but we started watching Young Sheldon, and I've always found it hilarious. Sheldon, the avowed atheist genius, does not mind people praying for him when things get hard. And he says that. I mean, he is, the show has understood even the most avowed atheist. There's no atheist in a foxhole. But with the water, like you said, AJ, it is really interesting because there's a dynamic at play that a lot of us may not be aware of. The Phoenicians were, seafaring people, right? Like there were airplanes back in the day. Like if you were doing something long distance, it's mostly going to be by boat, right? So these seafaring people were on the water. But when we say boats, these weren't tankers. These weren't cruise ships. Like, they were boats that you and I would not take that far offshore anymore. No. And so there was always, as these people in these boats would go out deep to sea, there were these, legends around the sea. That's where the sea monsters come from, or mermaids or whatever. There was something mystical about the sea because for the ancient people in the Near East specifically, the seas, the waters represented the deities of chaos.
Yeah.
This is chaos. This is mystery. This is beyond control. There's no understanding this. And I think it's a little bit ironic, at least, that today we know more about outer space than we do the deepest parts of the sea. Yeah. Right? Because there's still chaos and mystery. And so they're crying out to God, God, you have to do this. But what's interesting is there's only one God, not a God. There's one God who controls the storm.
Right. Yeah.
And it's Yahweh. It's Yahweh. It's the God of Jonah.
Yeah. So Jonah gets up and he does, and I can, again, you're inferring certain things from the text here, but you can imagine like everybody's been crying out to their God. Nothing's happening. This guy gets up. Hey, cry out to your God. Okay, Yahweh, I need you to fix this, whatever. And then boom, there's one deity out of all these deities that calms the winds and the waves.
And they say, wait, who are you and where did you come from?
Yeah. And then it's fascinating because when you look in the New Testament, there's one deity who controls the winds and the waves, and that deity's name is Jesus. And then you start to parallel those two things, and it's like, oh, wow.
That's right.
Jesus, Yahweh, together, same God, right? And
well, let's even go a step further. The idea of water representing chaos, right? The water representing, the mystery and the deities of chaos. It's not accidental that in the book of Revelation, chapter 13, verse 1, the beast that is the Antichrist comes out of the sea. Right? Like it is that same dynamic at play. And because we live in a very enlightened society, we've lost that dynamic. But whenever you see miracles happen on the water, there's a reason so many miracles happen on the water, around water in the Old Testament, in the New Testament. Think of, the shipwreck with Paul, I mean, all this stuff. Well, it's because this is God saying, hey, I'm the deity that controls the chaos and the deity that controls the order. I'm not just a tribal deity. All of this is mine.
So find some comfort in the fact that the guy at the end of this entire story who's going to try to derail everything, not the story of Jonah, but the story of history, who's going to try to derail everything, is coming from the place that God's already shown I have authority over.
Absolutely.
So it's pretty cool. But one of the other things I love about this, especially if we're kind of still including this in the nerd out section, is don't miss that when you are experiencing the grace of God through hardship, trial, whatever, and God's trying to get you back on track, there's moments like this with Jonah where God's got so much grace that it starts to spill over onto other people. And the Phoenicians, by all intents and purposes, were not necessarily a part of this timeline or plan until Jonah flees. And then, as he's fleeing, gets on their boat, oh, wow, we weren't going to encounter Yahweh until this guy showed up on the boat with us. And now, in Yahweh trying to be gracious to him, Yahweh showing us who he really is. And so now we're encountering the living God for the first time, which is fascinating.
I think it's a great callback to something that we mentioned in the podcast from a couple Fridays ago. It is that what happened on the boat wasn't about them, but it was for them, right? Like God used it for them. And I think that something else too, even going all the way back to what we mentioned about circumstances, is this is why we can't trust circumstances. Like, imagine if those Phoenician sailors are like, oh, what did we do to make our God mad, and they're trying to figure that out. They're trying to interpret the circumstances. But at the end of the day, we know, and they find out it had nothing to do with them. This was all about Jonah. And I think maybe this is a moment that each of us needs to embrace a little humility and say, maybe some of the stuff going on in your life isn't primarily about you. Maybe God's trying to speak to somebody in your life that you're really close to, somebody that you live with, somebody that you work with, whatever. And that's why it's so important to be discerning and to pray through some of this stuff and to, seek wise counsel, look at the scriptures, because look at me, listen to me. You're not the point of everything that God's doing in the world. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying it's not for you. God does so much for us, even if it's not primarily about us. And he's only able to do that because he's so sovereign over everything. Like he controls implications and consequences, but have a little humility and think, okay, maybe I'm not the center of this story. Maybe I'm a sailor in this story. Maybe I'm not Jonah. Heck, maybe even, like we said Sunday, I'm not Jonah. I'm Nineveh.
Yeah. And I think that's got some massive implications, like you said. But here's what's cool about that is there's going to be moments in your life where you are Jonah and you know what God's calling you to do and you're running from that. And then there's going to be a moment in your life where you realize, gosh, I am Nineveh. I've been running. I've been not even considering God in this equation. I've been the rebel that he really, really, really needs to give grace to. And I think as we start to see this whole picture, it's fascinating to me because God's plan is for Nineveh, right? God uses Jonah to get to Nineveh. And then as God's using Jonah to get to one group of pagans who don't trust, follow, pursue any of his moral code, moral law, any of that, he spills over and his grace spills onto another group of pagans. And so you have this coming full circle, the story of this God who seems like a tyrant by the beginning of it. And then when you start to look at it, it's like, man, it's the opposite. There's so much grace in this story. It's just expanding and it's touching everybody. It's touching Jonah. It's touching the Phoenicians. It's touching Nineveh. And I think as we start to understand that, we hopefully find some comfort in that because we realize, maybe I'm not always Jonah. Maybe like you said, I'm Nineveh. And I would ask you, Chip, to unpack why is it so important to understand that you're Nineveh?
Well, before I answer that specifically, I think it's important to hit on what you just said about grace expanding in every direction, right? It's almost like Paul understood this when he said, where sin abounds, grace abounds even more, right? But I think it's the reason that it was so important for us to understand it's Nineveh is not that we push that illustration to its limits. I'm not saying that America is modern Assyria, even though there's some interesting parallels there. What I'm saying is that one of the most amazing and overlooked aspects of this story is that God sent Jonah to Nineveh. Like, wouldn't God just want these wicked, violent people to get what they deserve? Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, this was an unexpected grace for an unexpected people who didn't deserve it. And grace always, we said this in our sermon, grace always has to be unexpected.
Yeah.
Because the moment that we start expecting it, it's not grace anymore. It's a wage. It's something we earn. And at the end of the day, I think that there is a great danger for so many people that are sitting in our churches, not specifically the Orchard, but not including the Orchard, like this is sitting in all of our churches where we expect grace because we are good, conservative, moral, upright people who aren't like them.
Yeah.
And yet it is the them that receive grace because they realize how unworthy they are to get it. That's why Jesus said, look, guys, I didn't come for the healthy, moral, good people. I came for the people who need a savior. I came for sinners. And here's the deal. We're all sinners. But it's our awareness of that sin that dictates how we hear that. Mm-hmm. And so there's just a lot of Christians who need to be reminded, you're a sinner. You're not a prophet who made a bad choice and it's going to work out for you at the end of the story. No, you are a wicked and rebellious people who need the grace of God in your life.
Yeah.
And I just think that we just can't miss that. We got to quit feeling entitled to grace, because when you feel entitled to grace, you lose what makes it grace. And it's not, I don't even know how we sing Amazing Grace anymore because it seems so ordinary that it doesn't move our needle.
Yeah. Here's kind of where I landed the plane Sunday in Lake City specifically, but we got done with the sermon and kind of closed it out and with our Easter times and all that, and just pointing to Easter Sunday. And I said, guys, it's going to be your tendency, and it's not a bad thing, to make sure you invite the people who you're close with and the people that you really want to see encounter the gospel for the first time to Easter, and that's a good thing. But I want to let you know that everything we just read in chapter 1 is pointing to God's grace for the person you don't want here. It's pointing to the person that you don't think deserves to be there. It's pointing to the person you'd feel a little edgy about if they actually did come to faith in Jesus, because you're not sure if they deserve that the same way you deserve that. And so maybe that's just another good plug. As you guys think through the Easter invites, think about the people who you love dearly, but then think about the people who are unlovable that you don't think deserve grace.
Yeah, and there's a tension there, right? Because God places us where we are around who we are so that we can impact them. And yet we need to be very careful that we don't go full, ancient religion and take this back to making it a tribal deity.
What do you mean? Unpack that.
Like you just said, people that look like us, talk like us, people we're close to. If we're not careful, we're making Christianity a tribal thing, and it's not. One of the things that I read this last week was an African-American pastor who was indignant about people in his own church, I believe, but at least his own circles, talking about how Christianity was a colonizer's religion. And he said, and he was making the argument, whoa, back up. Christianity came to Africa before anybody knew North America existed. Mm-hmm. Christianity came to Africa before people knew that Britain existed. Mm. The people who got the gospel first were not people who were easily sunburnt. They were darker skin tones than most of the people who sit in the churches we go to every single Sunday. Yeah. And so we need to be reminded, this is not a tribal religion. And if it was, it's not our tribe.
Yeah, it was for other people first.
And so the people who don't look like us, think like us, act like us, believe like us, vote like us, smell like us.
Yeah.
The gospel's for them.
Yeah.
And we need to be reminded of that.
Yeah, it's so good. I think it's a good way to round this out. I'm excited to keep the series going. I'm excited to dive into week 2.
Well, I round this out on a totally unserious
note? Yeah, go ahead.
Because it's burning in my head.
Take us home, Chip.
I did a youth camp several years ago, kind of led it, put it together, and we had breakout sessions like you do at camps. And one of the breakout sessions was a mission, and we brought in a missionary to talk about missions with the students. And I will never forget sitting in the missions class, because I tried to bounce around, right? And he asked the question. This was his question to start the class. I was excited. We brought a missionary to hear him teach this class. He said, who was the most successful missionary in the Bible? And what was the first answer everybody gave? Paul. Jesus.
Oh.
it's Jesus, right? Yeah. Jesus. And you know what his answer was? No. They're like, oh, okay, Paul? No. I don't know. John, or William Carey? No. Lottie Moon? No. I mean, name missionaries. Nobody get it. He goes, it was Jonah. Jonah was the most successful missionary in history because he had 100% conversion rate.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
When he went. And so, I mean, his point was, it was an icebreaker, but I will never forget walking out of that room saying, good Lord, what have we done? We just told a bunch of middle school and high school students that Jonah was a better missionary than Jesus.
Man. Golly.
I will never, to be clear, going on record, I believe Jesus is the best missionary that ever came to the world.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's been it. Ever since we started Jonah, that's been a worm that's in my brain. I just had to get it out.
But it's some good perspective because God can use you in spite of you.
That's true. That's great. That's great because at the end of the book, we don't know where Jonah is, but hey, 100% conversion rate.
Pretty incredible. I know I don't got that. So, man, that's good. Great way to round us out. Excited about next week. We'll keep diving in, keep having the conversation. Please let us know if you have any questions, thoughts that pop up. We love to engage those as well. Don't forget. And then as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing.
Yeah, I hope the rest of your week is pebbles.
Yep. Pebbles. All right. We out.
See ya.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Let's Talk About That. We hope it encouraged and challenged you as we continue to grow in this journey of faith and embrace community. If you have more questions, thoughts, or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us through our social media channels or visit our website and stay connected. Your questions are what make this podcast a dynamic and enriching experience. If you found today's discussion meaningful, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. Your engagement helps us spread the message and connect with others who may find value in these conversations. Until next time, we hope this episode inspired you and will help you bring Sunday's message into your week ahead. Keep the conversation alive, and remember, we're all on this journey together.